industries and advocates for strategic plans that leadership teams can rapidly implement within their organizations. Before I hand it off to them, I just want to say I've been speaking with both of them for about 3 months now in planning this event, and they have been just so incredibly wonderful. They are givers. They share. They want to make entrepreneurs' lives easier. They are educators. And I have just gained so much knowledge by being a subscriber to their YouTube channel and also by signing up to their mailing list. It's just been a wealth of information for me. So I will just say, I'm marketing for them. I highly recommend that you sign up for their newsletter after all this and you check out their YouTube. They have been wonderful. I am big fans of theirs, and I'm equally as excited as all of you to get this event started. So without further ado, Jill and Cheryl, please take us away.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Joseph. A big
Thank
shout out to you for your support over the last few months. And Joseph has been spreading the word. I also wanted to shout out Jessa, who's like on the call. She's like doing all the tech stuff. She's been amazing, answering all of our emails. And I actually also Jill and I also wanted to shout out Martin Solorzano from StaffThink. He's one of your folks too. He was the one.
And he's on the call. Yep.
Yep. And he connected us to Joseph initially. So, just slightly down the I-95 corridor coming at you from Greater Philadelphia. Thank you very, very much for having us. We want to have a very participatory session today. So please put your questions in the Q&A. We are going to be asking you to give us, takeaways and answering some questions and all that type of stuff. So I'm just giving you all a heads up that this is going to be an active conversation. I know that finance and accounting can sort of be sometimes like dull and boring, and our promise to you is that we will not make it dull and boring. So I just giving you that heads up right at the very beginning. And the other thing I want to shout out to is Anna, because from your EO accelerator program, she's also been really helpful for us. Any other shout outs, Jill? We're good?
No, I think we're good. Can I just do a logistics check that you guys are seeing our screen okay? Just the presentation mode. Are you good? Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be doing dueling so I can see folks up here and have the slides in front of me. So just letting you all know that. So how a number of you had already raised your hands on the Verne Harnish thing. But some of this may be like a reminder for you. As Pat Lencioni says, we're here to remind you of some things that you probably already knew but have forgotten along the way. Some of this may be new stuff. But we just want to clarify that we're going to try and speak across the board here. So we have 3 learning objectives for you today, being very practically oriented, right? So the first one is that we want to reiterate or remind you or introduce you to the 4 critical decisions that you need to make in order to grow your business, because that's really where we're grounding the work that we're doing. We also want to help you to understand the 7 levers that can dramatically affect the cash flow in your business and do a little bit of work around that. And then third, we want you to come away from this understanding and getting sort of an overview of pricing strategies that could help you drive top line growth as well as improve your bottom line. So I had asked Jessa to send, so you should have gotten a copy of the growth tools, which is a pretty massive document, but some of the tools are in there that we're going to be referencing today. And the other thing that we had asked Jessa to do was to send out something asking you to have your P&Ls and balance sheets with you. So do people have those with them, or can they reference them as part of this conversation? Yeah, thumbs up. Oh, look at that. We love you doing your homework. Good, great. So historically, we've found in our work with small companies, small and mid-market companies, there are 3 areas where CEOs and their C-level executives struggle the most. The first is just having too many priorities, right? Too many balls in the air, like which is going to be which is going to be the one that we want to focus on in order to accelerate our growth and create a more robust business. The second one is that they struggle to hold people accountable to their commitments and get them all pulling in the same direction. And alignment can also be a critical problem in small companies, particularly as you grow because of the complexity. So again, we understand from our conversations with Joseph that you guys have, and again, EOS has been out there now for about 15 years. So are some of you also like EOS aficionados? Yeah. Okay. So this is where EOS actually comes in very handy because their focus is on execution and a little bit on people, right? So they help you to focus, they help you to get clear on your priorities, they help you to build plans. They give you some of the people tools to hold people accountable. The third priority, however, is, or the third thing that CEOs and entrepreneurs struggle with is maintaining profitability as they grow, and the need to add people and the need to add infrastructure. As Greg Crabtree, and he's one of our favorites, talks about in simple numbers, there's a black hole of profitability that typically hits small companies someplace around 3 million, like between 2 and 5. There's actually another black hole that happens north of 15 million. And so this is really one of our big purposes today, is to help you start to think about your profitability and your cash flow. And how do you balance that? And how do you make sure that you're building your businesses on profitable business and not just going after revenue, right, for revenue's sake? And then, of course, most recently with all things COVID, folks have had less time, less bandwidth. You don't want to reinvent the wheel if there's a tool, but where do I find the tool? And that's, as Joseph said, that's part of what we're trying to help people to do. So our educated guess today is that you guys are struggling with growing your companies profitably, which is maybe part of the reason why you're here, or maybe some of you are just learning junkies as well. So can you, in the chat, just give us some idea about why are you here today? What is your biggest challenge right now after a year of being
Learning junkie.
learning? There's a few of you. What's your biggest challenge right now that pertains to growing profitably? So if you could put that in the chat, that would be helpful.
Prices.
Avoid the 15 minute. Good. Yay. Someone's being proactive around the 15-minute sales, so fixed costs, just to learn. Okay. Here, I'll grab my simple numbers book and do my little advertisement for Greg.
Hey, Cheryl, Beth, one of the questions that just comes, why is there a black hole at 15 million again?
So again, there's more in that in simple numbers, but the major reason is because that's the tipping point where you're having to invest in infrastructure and people. And actually, Jill can speak to that directly. Get that when she was on the Philly fastest growing companies list when she and I met. Jill, do you want to? Should you talk to that just for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about when you are scaling, there's certain times where you have to really focus on your infrastructure, your scalable infrastructure. And sometimes you have to spend money in order to make money at the end of the day, right? But we're going to talk about that today a little more.
Yeah, we'll make sure that you have that resource as well. So
Yeah.
Infrastructure really is anything like people, technology, taking the time to put processes in place. I mean, tech is a big part of infrastructure, honestly, tech and people. It's like human capital and IT capital, right? Those are your two big investments that you have to make. CRM systems, it's interesting. Well, and Jill, make sure I don't get too off topic. It's interesting because one of the things that we do is we sort of add things on, right? So, we need a CRM system. And so we invest in HubSpot. Well, it's only $66 a month, right? But then we need Reply, or we need this software, we need this hardware. And you start to add up. When you start to add up all these infrastructures, and it's just like little niggling, it eventually will hit you in your profitability. And so that's what we want you to start thinking about. Good. All right, we've got everybody. Great. Cool. So can you go to
Yep.
to the slide? So no matter what, our plan today is to give you some practical tools that you can be starting to address the cash issues. And then we are scheduled for a part 2 on March 23rd. We'll be back to talk a little bit more and dig into strategy. And those 2 key pieces, cash and strategy, are the pieces that really I think Scaling Up does a great job with, because you need money, you need oxygen. We always say cash is like oxygen. But let's just, as a review for 4 decisions. So the people decision is really about, do you have the right people? Like, this is Jim Collins, right? Do you have the right people in the right seats? And are they all doing the right thing? And how engaged are they? So definitely having KPIs in place to measure engagement. And again, we could have a whole nother session on that. We're not going to go there today. But we're big fans of Gallup and the work that they do. Strategy is your second decision, right? And the key decision, the key measurement of how well your strategy is working is, are your gross margin dollars growing as fast as you would like, predictably and sustainably? Which means that you have something that people want and are willing to pay a good price for. If you don't have that, if you don't have predictability, if you don't have, and it doesn't have to be a reoccurring revenue, but it does have to be predictable, then you may have a strategy issue. And as I said, you could join us on March 23rd. Execution is the third decision, right? Have you increased revenues, but your net profitability has dropped? Are you spending way too much time? How many people are spending way too much time working now than they did a year ago? Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, bandwidth is a problem right now. Like, execution is something that I know that lots of folks have. Do you have an accountability problem? Like, right? So, having to manage remotely, like we talked about, having kids at home, having dogs at home, whatever the case may be, right? It's really hard to execute right now. So you may have that as an issue. And then finally, you can get by with decent people, decent strategy, decent execution, but not a day without cash. And it's not just about making payroll. It's about having the cash reserves in place, the core capital account, as Greg would call it. Jim Collins calls it having enough oxygen stashed away, so that it's not just about protecting yourself. It's also about having cash to be able to take advantage of unforeseen opportunities. So we say cash is like oxygen. So as you think about this, people, strategy, execution, and cash, are your people engaged? Do you have predictably going up revenue, gross profit, not just the top line? Your bandwidth, execution, having enough cash on hand, having oxygen. Again, in the chat, what is your biggest challenge of these 4 decisions? We'll take a minute and just write it in the chat. What's your biggest 4 decisions? Chat. Typing takes much longer than you guys are good. Lumpy scales. Ooh, that's another good one. All right. Another one. Accountability.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we'll try and tie together. Jill, I think it would be really good for us to tie together cash and accountability too, because again, a lot of Jill's sort of like a poster child.
Yeah.
With learning. She's learned a lot along the way. And I think some of the stories that she could share would be good. People who don't take the reins and run.
Yeah, because all these ultimately affect cash, right? So the 3 major barriers to growing are 3 things, right? Having the right leadership, having a scalable infrastructure, as Cheryl Beth mentioned, and then your market dynamics and keeping in tune with the market dynamics. And all these affect cash. To have the right people, like for service companies, that could be your greatest expense, right? So you have to make the right hires. Strategy, that's all around top line growth and gross margins. Execution, that's accountability. If you don't have the right metrics in place and aren't holding people accountable, that affects your net profit. And then cash affects, that's all about sustaining cash flow. And because you can be profitable, but if you run out of money, you're sunk. And so all these things together, weave together to tell the story of how you're handling cash and making strategic decisions to ultimately affect your bottom line for it. So
So if you actually want more information on some of this, we actually, on the YouTube channel that Joseph mentioned earlier, we actually do have a webinar that goes into these 4 decisions, and there's actually an assessment that you can take, so we can send that to you as well. But for today, we are going to be focused on cash. So here's a couple of the questions to be asking yourself. And again, we're really big believers. Vern says this, Jim Collins says this. We're really big believers in sometimes the most important thing is to be asking the right questions, right? Not necessarily to have the answers. So here's some of the questions that we have to get you going around cash. So number 1, do you have a cash reserve of a minimum of 2 to 3 months of operating expenses? Again, this is a Crabtree thing. This is a Jim Collins thing. Actually, Jim Collins would tell you it's more like 6 months at least. And for those of you, I think somebody said this in the chat, who have lumpy revenue, right? Or cyclical revenue or seasonality, you probably need to have more. If you're in the marketing space, Crabtree would tell you that you need to have at least 6 months of core capital because marketing is so up and down with the economy. Second question, are you able to predict your cash flow 2 to 3 months out, right? Maybe not have a crystal ball, but you've got a good predictability and a good cash flow projection tool in place. And then the third question, again, going back to what we just talked about, which is, are you in an industry that is cyclical or sensitive to economic conditions, right? Marketing, construction, real estate, all of those can like make you or break you if you're not managing your cash. And so if you've got, how many, let's just do a quick poll. How many of you have core capital 2 to 3 months? Yeah.
Oh, good.
Oh, no. And by the way, core capital is not a line of credit.
It has to be in a place that you can easily access it.
Yeah,
right?
only because of PPP. Well, that's good. I mean, it's bad that it's bad. All right, so here's my judgment, right? It's bad if you were eligible for PPP too, right? But at the same time, right, PPP has definitely strengthened a lot of people's balance sheets over the last year. So that's where it's been helpful.
Mhm.
All right. And so again, we reference Greg a lot. Like I would highly recommend it. How many of you have seen Greg or read his books? Are using Simple Numbers? So for those of you that this is the short leg, well, I mean, honestly, Simple Numbers is like, in our book, it's like part of the trilogy. So along with Scaling Up, Simple Numbers, along with the Jim Collins, Great by Choice, that's sort of our trilogy of business books that we recommend. There is, we do have Crabtree on the YouTube channel. So, and again, we'll send that to you as well. We had Greg come to the Philadelphia area back in September to talk about his latest book, which is Simple Numbers 2.0, Secrets to Smart Scaling. And again, if you're, I think somebody said earlier, like that they were new to all of this, I would definitely grab Greg's book, Simple Numbers. It's really easy to read and he does a great job. So that's my sort of resource. Look at that. Yay. All right. How are we doing? I used to run learning days. Oh, there it is. Yeah, he does learning days for EO Accelerator. And this is the resource that we will send you if you want to. It's about, I'm going to give you a heads up. It's about a 3.5 hour webinar, but you can listen to it in the car when you're driving or whatever, or on the treadmill. Great. All right. Can you go on to the next one?
Yep.
So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jill, who is going to talk about the 7 cash levers that can help you with your cash flow.
Thanks. So hi, everybody. Just before we jump into this, so just a little background. So I've had my company for about 20 years. And I am a little bit kind of strategically focused, but also fiscally minded. And I believe when we look at our finances, I think every CEO should understand your finances enough so that you can make strategic decisions about your company, right, at the end of the day. So I'm not a tax accountant, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a banker. I'm a person who's just running a company and trying to do the best we can, given the dynamics that happen for any entrepreneur as you run a company. So that's how I look at it and how I look at cash, kind of really from a practical standpoint. So my goal today with you is to talk about, in this case, the cash levers that you can pull in your business that can help you free up cash and have an impact on your, at the end of the day, your bottom line. But so let me kind of talk about that. How many have heard this saying, revenue's vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king? How many have heard that before? Like, I had this on my wall when I have it on my wall, and I would point it to people because they'd say, I run a $55 million company. And I'm like, great, what's your profit and how much cash you got in the bank? Because at the end of the day, you can't pay your bills with profits. You pay your bills with cash.
Right? They are either.
Right. So, and to pay your bills, you have to have that cash. And that's why when Cheryl Beth was saying cash is oxygen. Cash gives you options at the end of the day. So you can have a very large revenue company, but if you're not having the cash at the end of the day, that's a lot of work, right? For not a lot of payoff at the end of the day. So, so Cheryl Beth mentioned we asked you to bring your P&L and your balance sheet. So I'm going to ask a couple questions on that. So in the chat, how often do you look at your P&L? Go ahead and put in the chat. Once a month, once a quarter,
Once
never.
a week.
Some people, it's okay to say never. Like, what is that? Monthly,
Quarterly.
once a month, quarterly, right? And this might depend on how fast you're growing, right? Or how fast things are churning. Weekly, awesome. Good. All right, how about this? How often do you look at your balance sheet? Let's switch to balance sheet. Never. Yep. Weekly, never.
You were
Yep.
right in predictions, Jill.
Well, I never did. In the beginning, it's like, let me just know the expenses coming in and the revenue expenses going out and the revenue coming in, and what's my net at the end of the day. But here I want to bring in the equation of the balance sheet and how that affects your cash flow, right? And why you kind of have to look at both to understand what's going on. Because it's important to know, like, your P&L will tell you your revenue, your expenses, your net profitability that's occurred over a period of time. Your balance sheet tells you the status of your business at a point in time, and it shows you what you owe and what you own, right? So basically, some of it is also how you fund your business. So it's important to understand the variables that drive each and how they kind of work together. So I have a few exercises throughout today. So if you have it handy, it'd be good to look at it.
And I think it's important. So Jill and I'm going to give you guys a caveat. I'm an engineer by training. Jill does have her MBA, but it was in management, right? So
Yep.
Neither one of us is like a CPA. We're not accountants. We're not financial people, but we truly, truly believe that this is, well, Vern says it's the number 2 weakness of entrepreneurs. Anybody know what the number 1 weakness is of an entrepreneur, by the way? You can take yourself off mute, I think. Any guesses?
Limiting themselves.
Limiting themselves. Yeah, that's actually a good one.
Trouble delegating.
Working in the business. Yeah, these are all really good. Actually, the number 1 weakness, according to Vern, is you guys are also good at sales, that you suck at marketing. But number 2 is accounting and looking at your finances. So
right.
Good.
So with cash reserves, right? Cash reserves give you flexibility. And I think the larger cash reserves than your competitors, the better, because that enables you to take advantage of what we call those lucky moments, right? When opportunity strikes, it's the right time, it's the right place, and you just know that that opportunity is the right one to take with your business, and having the cash reserves helps you to take advantage of that. And Jim Collins wrote a whole book about it, Great by Choice, that's another good resource to tune into if you haven't seen that before. And then with Greg Crabtree, we say 2 to 3 times your operating expenses you want to have at your fingertips, but more so having 3 to 10 times the cash reserve of your competitors so that you can prepare for that luck, right? And capitalizing on the luck. So how do you get there? It's nice to say, but how do you build up those cash reserves? And you have to take a hard look at your books, and you have to identify how each line item kind of impacts the cash flow in your company. And then hopefully you can take some of that cash and cash reserves and start building that cash reserves, right? So I want to talk about cash flow today. And let's define what we mean by that. So this means it's the difference between your company's cash inflows and outflows in a given period, right? And in the strictest sense, the net cash flow refers to that change in your company's cash balance as detailed on a cash flow statement. This is the fuel that helps you expand, develop new products, buy back stock if you're kind of in the stock game, and private equity type things, pay back dividends, distributions to you, bonuses to your staff, reducing debt. It's all those things. And that's why some people value cash flow more than just about any other financial measure. So we always talk about profitability, but I would argue cash flow, if you don't know that, and if you aren't looking at that at least monthly, you're missing out here on ways to bring in and save kind of more cash for your business. It basically allows you to conduct your day-to-day operations. That's what we're talking about. Without long-term positive net cash flow, like an organization will fail. And, for those people that are like, I don't understand that. It's like, well, you can be profitable, but go out of business. How many people have known a business that have said that? It's like, we were going to be so profitable this year, but we ran out of money and that was it. Well, that's this problem with net cash flow. It is important to note, though, that short-term negative cash flow, it's not always a bad thing, because if you're a company where you need to spend cash to build like a second site or to open a new office or an investment that's going to pay off in the end, then that investment will eventually generate more cash, then okay. And I think Greg Crabtree just wrote a new book about this. It's a return on invested capital, right? Where there's, I think, a 2-year time period where you need to get that money back, and some.
Well,
So,
and for folks that were asking, if you haven't read Simple Numbers, start with Simple Numbers, the first book. And then, yes, the second book is great for those of you that may not have gotten to it yet.
right. So what affects cash? 7 things. 7 things affects cash: price, volume, your cost of goods or cost of goods sales, your overhead expenses, your AR, your AP and AR, and then your work in progress if you're like a service type company, or your inventory and inventory turns with that. We're going to dissect these a little bit. But before...
And can we get a feel for that, Jill? Like, can we ask people, like, are you a service business? Are you manufacturing? Like,
Yeah,
can
you guys just
put that in the chat so we can get an idea of like what kind of a
are you
construction?
a combo
Yeah, combo market, what event plan?
service?
Yep,
Service.
restaurant and
Service. Oh,
marketing,
software.
IP. Okay,
Good. So a lot of service.
That's
I was in my company was a service. We did consulting for large corporations, pharmaceutical, medical device, biotech companies. So I understand the world of service. Okay, good. So often we say to ourselves, like, if we're having cash flow kind of issues, like one of the first things we do is we'll say, great, I just need to sell more, right? And that volume, that boost in cash will keep us going. And sometimes that's fine, but other times, like if your costs to fulfill kind of new orders surge before you get that money back in the door, then you could have a negative cash flow. And so you really have to be careful, and you have to understand some of the dynamics, these 7 levers that play into the effect of when you increase your volume and you just go out and sell more. Because there's actually situations where more selling might actually hurt your cash position, right? So today, we're going to talk about the power of one. How many of you have heard about the power of one, this
Or-
concept before?
Yeah. Good.
So-
Or read scaling up and seeing the chapter.
Yeah. So this is the whole concept that small changes can create kind of that massive impact on your cash. So we're going to start looking at these and really, again, from a CEO perspective, I look at it as what are the right questions I should be asking of my numbers, which I want to share a bunch of those questions that you should be asking of your financial numbers. And what are the trends that you want to look for from a cash perspective so that you know if you're headed in the right direction or if you need to make adjustments in where you're going. We always say you should have at least a 90-day cash forecast at any point in time so that you know ahead of the game that you're going to have a cash flow issue before it actually rears its head.
And again, your accountant can work with you on that. I mean, Greg Crabtree's organization did a lot of that for some of our folks last year when COVID hit, who hadn't been doing some of the stuff that they needed to be doing. So, I mean, if you don't have a cash flow forecast and don't have a really strong financial person, an accounting person in your organization, reach out to your accounting firm.
Yeah.
Or we can put you in touch with folks too.
So small changes add up. So I'm guessing, would you believe me if I told you, if you make 1% adjustments on 3 different aspects of your business, it would increase your net profit by 19%. And here's how. So take a $10 million company, 10 million in revenue, and say they increase their sales by 1%. That's a $100,000 change, right? And then they decrease their COGS 1%.
Cost of goods.
Cost of goods by about, that's a 50% boost, right? That they saved because they decreased their COGS. And then their operating expenses, they also decreased it by 1%. General administrative, just their overhead. And that's an additional 40,000. You add all that up, that's 190,000 bucks. And that is, that can float to the bottom line if you want it to. And that's a 19% increase. So whenever we talk about these levers, I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, like especially around pricing, we go, oh, I can't raise prices. I don't think the market can bear it, right? I don't think my customers are going to be able to absorb it. And I think we have this working assumptions in our mind might be, well, it's 5% increase, it's 10% increase or whatever. How about a 1% increase in pricing? Because that can have a dramatic effect just on your cash flow. Even that, just 1%, that's the power of one, because all these things can add up to give you kind of that, I don't know, a bigger result at the end of the day. It's just tweaking things a little bit. So we actually have software, and this is the,
I have 5 lucky winners.
5 lucky winners. First 5 people that reach out to us, we'll run this for you for free. And we'll tell you based on, you have to share your last 3 years financials with us, but we'll run it through a software system and meet with you and talk about what are the levers that might be good for you to consider changing or altering, and what would be the net impact on your cash flow. This was taken from another company where we kind of ran it, and we can actually run it where and do scenarios. Well, what if we increase prices by 2% and but my overheads are going to go up a little bit by 1%, and then like how can you adjust those? So for the 5 people that reach out to us there's the plug for the day. That's it. Um, then we're happy to run this for you. So a few things about the 7 ways. Price is easy, right? Price is like the most sensitive thing that you can do and change to have an impact on your net cash flow. So that's why it's important to think about your pricing strategy. And Cheryl Beth's going to talk about that a little bit later today. Volume is if you held your prices the same, but you just sold more of what you offer. What would be the effect on your net cash flow? And again, that whole, it could be like with this business, they actually raised their volume. They were considering doing it, but they had to consider the impact on their cash flow. It's negative because for every dollar that you kind of spend in producing or delivering on that new sale, you also have to invest in the next sale that's going to come. So what's your impact on your cash flow? You just got to be careful with that. Direct costs are the costs you incur to produce your product or your service. So also known as COGS, right? So you should have in that include your direct labor. What's the labor that you need to actually produce that, and the inventory or the things that you need to actually deliver your service. And then overheads, that's up, that's everything referred to like below the line, but that's like utilities and rent and all those things. So those are the things that the levers that you can increase or decrease by 1%. And then that can have an impact on your cash flow. The other 3 things on here are in average days, right? So the average AR days. So how fast do you collect monies from your customers? How fast do you pay your suppliers, right? Average payable days. And then we have WIP, right? So work in progress. And a lot of you are service.
Nobody likes to talk about.
No, but it's like the thing to know, right? And I'm going to talk a lot more about that today because that's your carry. That is from when the average number of days from when you start work to when you complete the work, right? And then you get paid maybe somewhere out there, especially for you service industries, because this was my life, right? It's like I had to bring people on board. I had to pay them, as they're doing the work. And then I didn't get paid for 45, 60 days net until later. Well, who's funding that? I am. You are as a business owner. So you have to have the cash to do that. So if you can decrease your WIP days, like even by 1 day, that can have a dramatic impact on your cash flow for it.
How many folks are actually measuring WIP? Because that's one of the other issues
Yeah,
that
that's a good question.
I mean, okay.
Anyone? Just did. Okay. Yeah, and I'm going to ask you what you think your WIP average days are later on when I have a few slides specifically on it, because you have to hear these concepts a couple times before you kind of go, I have to start paying attention to that as a business owner. So you have your P&L and your balance sheet. So get them out if you've got them handy. And if you don't, you can kind of play along with me here. So here's where the 7 levers, they're tied to your profit and loss statement and your balance sheet, right? So on the left, this is just a sample company, and it's not even the same company, but you guys are smart. You guys get the idea here. So from your P&L, right, that price, volume, COGS, and overhead are on your P&L. Price and volume are related to your sales at the end of the day. COGS is COGS, and overhead are your expenses. So do you know what a 1% increase in, let's say, volume would be for your business? You just look at your sales and say, what's 1%? Okay. All right. Yeah. So, and then the same question I have for these. Do you know what a 1% reduction in COGS might be? Do you know what a 1% reduction in overhead expenses might be? I know for me, and I'm going to talk about this later, I would actually, on the P&L, I would do a line item on the P&L and say, who's accountable for that line item in my company? Who's watching the expenses and the overhead? Who's watching the service labor? Who's accountable for materials under COGS? And then when you start delegating and you're growing, you have to then set those accountabilities on the people responsible for those line items. So that's one thing, and I'm going to say it again later, is you not only have to understand it, but at the end of the day, if you're delegating and you've got a bunch of people running around, you need to make sure they understand that they're accountable for watching those numbers and whatever the targets are that you set for them. But anyway, 4 of those levers come from your P&L. The other 3 come from your balance sheet, right? So your balance sheet has, like, this one's a sample. It has cash. What's in your checking account? What's in your savings account? Your money market account? It's got AR, like you've billed for things, you've invoiced. So how much is outstanding that you need to collect on, and any other assets you might have. And then you have liabilities. That's your AP, account payable, your current liabilities, your AP. If you've got accrued kind of salary that you're paying people, like that comes from here. And then WIP is a combination of some of these things that I'll talk about. So you have to really kind of understand both. And that's why as entrepreneurs, we always look at the P&L and I'm like, well, what's going on with your balance sheet at the end of the day? Because all these things play into your cash flow. So I want to challenge you, like as we go through this, if you were to do 1% increases or 1% increases or reductions on any of these, like, do you know the impact on your business at the back of the envelope, right? It's a question.
So WIP stands for work in progress. Somebody was
Right.
asking the question.
Yep, work in progress.
And you can work around things. I mean, you can bill up front, like billing up. That's one of the reasons people bill up front, is so that they're not having as much carry, right?
Yep, right.
But if you're not measuring something, if you're not tracking something, it becomes very challenging to monitor it and do something about it. So if your one takeaway from this is, shit, I really need to do WIP, I need to. Great. We'll be very excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, I'll put my CEO hat back on, right? So it's important to know your numbers. That's number one. And then the impact that the 1% movement can have. But really what's more important to me as a CEO is, what questions are you asking around your financials? If you're just kind of leaving it to an accountant or a bookkeeper, I would say you're missing out on some strategic conversations, because finance is the underpinning for me. And I'll even say, I can send you a list of questions that you should be asking about your finances when you look at it. So
and
Cheryl,
you are going to be getting a copy of these slides. So I
Yeah.
know somebody has been asked, a couple people have been asking about slides, but we'll get those to you tomorrow.
Yep. So, somebody said, yes, please, on the questions. I will send those to you, because it's like, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. We're busy running a company, but there are financial questions that you should be asking. So here's some examples. So this one's all about profitability. These are the things you have to know with profitability. And you also have to know you have to start looking for trends. If you just look at your finances as a point in time, you could be having a really good month and say, everything's good. But if you have a really bad month, that's when we like pull things out. And I would say that's not good. Like, as you're growing, you have to start looking at profitability. You have to start looking at ratios and trends. So with this, these are trends around revenue. For this company, they're up $86,000 in revenue from the previous year. Why is that? Right? What was on budget? Why did the revenue change? What are we offering, that makes it? What happened there to get our revenue to go up? That's easy, right? We always want to know that. And same thing for it going down. Gross margin. So why has this changed? And, did we do something with our COGS and make changes? Did we make a change in our product and our service mix to get our gross margin? For this company, even though their revenues went up, their gross margins went down. Why? And then operating profit, right? That's when you take out the overheads. You should focus on your overhead expenses and make sure your overhead growth rate is not going faster than your revenue growth rate. right? Like, so we often think overheads are fixed, and I'm like, baloney. Like you should look at your expenses, your overhead expenses. I would every quarter and say we need to get that down by 1%. Sometimes we just get stuck in ruts, and we have to look at it. And then net profit, are we trending up, down? And you know, if you're a Crabtree fan, you know you're trying to get to 15% net profit. 10% is the new break even. Like if you're doing less than 10, you got to figure out how to get it to 10 at a minimum, because that's your new break even. 15% is when you hire new staff. 13% is a great company, right? But you should wait to get to 15% before you hire anybody. But you should look at these kind of trends, and then over time say what's happening. And all of these should be going up. Well, gross margin percentage, operating profit percentage, net profit. This company's going down. And I would say they got some serious, brutal conversations coming up, right? Around why are all these things happening for it. So my question is you, like, do you know your net profit percentage? We all should. And I'm hoping everyone here goes, yeah, no problem. Do you know your gross margin percentage? Right? Because that's a really good thing. It's nice to know your revenue, that's vanity, but your gross margin is really, is stronger to look at that. All right. And then I'd say you should know your back of the, I call it the back of the envelope. If it can't fit on the back of the envelope, it's too much for me. Like I just want to know the metrics I need to look at and how I'm spending money in my organization. So I call them back of the envelope. So like for every $100 in revenue, how much are you spending in COGS? And then for every $100 we generate, what are you spending on overhead? And then you net, what's your net? And I would show this to my staff because they're like, ooh, we're profitable. And I'm like, well, we get $2, you know, for every $100. That's not so great. You need at least 10, at least 15, right? So do you know your back of the envelope kind of numbers at the end of the day?
And how many folks are practicing that type of stuff? How many folks are actively sharing their financials with their teams? Yeah, good. Some.
Few. Yeah.
That is one of the bigger impacts. I mean, again, we're big Jack Stack fans. We're big open book management fans. Jill shared financials with her whole employee base.
Yeah.
If they don't have the information, they can't make better decisions.
Right. And I'm a big proponent of that in general, because in good times, it's great to share that. And I would say even in bad times, it's good for everyone to know it, because then everybody digs in and goes, how can we help? Right? Like what can we do on all these different 7 levers? It's a way to ground the conversation with your staff, you know, because they all take a part in it. It's not just your finance person and you locked in a room going, what are we going to do? If you're open book management, I'm a big advocate for it, then everyone can help. So
how do you show financials without showing what you're making?
Well,
Here comes.
So I'm an education company. So I just said, well, I think I need to educate people more. And I would say net profit is not a bad word. And it's not the Jill going to Tahiti fund net profit, even though that's totally fine. But it's like educating what happens with the net profit. And there's 4 forces of cash with your net profit that you do with cash, with your net profit, right? Cheryl Beth, you want to tell people what they are? What's the first thing?
We're doing a Crabtree revenue.
Pay your taxes.
Pay your taxes.
Right? This is pre-tax profit we're talking about.
And when you have a bigger tax bill, that's really good, because that means that you've actually made money, as according to Greg. And then you have to pay off your debt, right? Like, again, like debt is not necessarily a good thing. There's reasons you have debt, but you want to be able to pay off your debt. And then you also need to put money away in your core capital. So for those of you that only have a core capital now because of PPP, like you should be putting money away and people understand that. I think, Jill and I have found that when you explain that to people,
yeah,
like they're like, oh yeah, taxes. Oh yeah, debt. Like, there's a mortgage or whatever, right? Oh yeah.
And then
Um,
the last thing you do is you can pay out bonuses and distributions. That's after you do all those other things, right? If you're fiscally kind of minded. And then that in my company started a whole conversation around bonuses and how do we do that, and what percentage do we want to carve out. And then I would talk about you need profits too to fund your next investment, and what are we doing as a company to grow. And people actually wanted to know more about stability than just the numbers. And if I found people were kind of having the wrong reaction around numbers, I'm like, well, maybe you don't work here. You know what I mean? Maybe you're not in the right spot, because we want to have a culture that is about that. So I see some people are sharing their numbers with their team.
mhm,
Good. Yeah.
Good.
Back down. Yeah. Yeah. Pay taxes. Yeah. I mean, it's the real four forces of cash, right? Those are the four forces of it. It's not, entrepreneurship's not for the faint of heart, but okay. So let me kind of let me stop here. What's one thing you've heard so far today?
In the
Because I tend to
comment,
talk a lot. Can you write it in the chat?
just one takeaway.
Yeah.
Net profit.
profit.
Yeah, for about
It's a
80%.
pre-tax net profit goal. Yep. Good. Look at ratios and trends.
10% is so last year. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
And to hire staff.
Transparency.
Yeah,
111. Yeah. It doesn't always take a huge swing to have a good impact on your cash. And then WIP. Awesome. Okay, good. So this, I'll just breeze through this example, but if you were to look at it this simple, and you guys can look at this when we send out the deck, right? Like this is how you calculate it. It's pretty simple. For a $1 million in net sales business, $60, because that's the total cost of goods sold, is spent on COGS, 30s on overheads, and then we net $10 at the end of the day on revenue. And I actually would go through that exercise with my staff. I'm like, here's $100. And then literally what we get to keep, and 20%. I would say we get to keep 5, and they're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So, and I would encourage you to figure out what's your kind of back of the envelope calculations here, so that you know it, so that you can start thinking in terms of profit ratios, and saying, you know what, instead of $2 net profit or 10, let's get to 11, guys. I just want 11 or 12. So it's a way to have a conversation with your staff in a meaningful way.
And that's where things like The Great Game of Business and Running Mini Games and another really great book by Jack Stack are really helpful.
Yeah. The balance sheet side, I want to talk about WIP and a little bit about AR and AP. So if you're like balance sheets scare you, it's okay. They're really not complicated, right? It covers your assets, your liabilities, and your equity. And it talks about things like AR. So how the number of days that once you invoice your customer, like before it's actually you get money. So how fast can you collect those monies? And we've seen a lot of businesses that are great at invoicing, but they don't do the follow-up. So if you have like net 30 days, net 45 days with your customers, and they aren't really paying you to 60, that's like an easy way to pull in the money kind of faster. Just focus on it. WIP days for you service industries, that's the average number of days from when you start work to when you complete work. And then payable days, that's how fast you pay your suppliers, your vendors. And I would say pay them as late as you can without getting any penalties, right? Because you can hold on to that cash just a little bit longer. You're trying to shorten the amount of time from when cash comes into the organization and leaves. I'm sorry, elongate that so that you can have that money. The working capital days is how long it takes for you to convert your working capital into into revenue. So capital's just another word for money. And working capital is the money that you have available to fund your day-to-day operations, right? So it's what you have to work with. So the things, some of the things, and these are some of the trends. So you want to look at payable days. This company was crazy. They were paying their suppliers like within a day. Like they were a large company, and the person doing the books would get bills and they'd pay them like right then and there, instead of saying, well, we could wait 30 days, right? Or one time they had a huge insurance payment and they're like, well, can we break this up over the year? They paid it all in one day. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, don't like save onto your money as much as you can with it. AR, they were pretty steady, but you're trying to look for trends, right? Around our receivable days or any of these days, are they trending up? Are they trending down? You want your payable days to be steady or trend up, your receivable days to kind of go down or be steady. And most importantly, do they balance each other out, right? Money comes in, money goes out. Are they balanced? And then this company, their work in progress is 4 days from work starting to work complete. So this working capital, this whole concept is really interesting because it's really about the carry of what I was talking about before, between when you pay your staff or your suppliers and when you get the cash, right? That's your working capital days, and that's your float. That's what you have to fund, or a bank funds that. If you're borrowing money like that, those are your days. So it's basically when the money leaves your wallet, how fast does it come back into your wallet? And do you know that number of days? I'm going to ask you, do you guys know your WIP? Anybody? Varied?
Very negative. Negative. Yeah, right now he's making an investment.
Yeah.
Actually, Lucian has a question, Jill, around his customer sets his due dates. So how can he leverage WIP?
I think I would need more information to answer that. So if your customer sets your due date, like what can you do for payment of the people that are performing the work? Like, is there any latitude to think about changing that? And then it sets the due date, but are there milestone payments? Can you get a retainer? Like there's all these different options.
Yeah, and for people that do a prepayment, I mean, we talk about that. I mean, all the time, right? Dell Computer was able to dramatically reduce and get into the negatives.
Yeah.
Because they started taking payment up front before anything had been done. And they had
awesome.
They had horrible AR.
Yeah, before they made that change, and they said people pay for their computers up front when they order them, and then we'll build them. And that was a negative. But that was awesome. You actually get the money before you actually pay any of your people. Go for that. Like if you can get there, like, oh, it's not a lot of risk. Government agencies are a little tough. Yeah.
For another one.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, I would encourage you to know your carry. What's your carry? How many days, and can you have that? And so a person, I think, asked before, why do you want cash reserves instead of a line of credit? And I would say, well, because if your carry expands, I don't want to have to go to a bank to get that. Like I want to be able to be my own line of credit. That was always my strategy. And there are some times for a line of credit, right? That is fine. But oftentimes people start to slip to use the line of credit to do things that they shouldn't do, just because they might not want to make hard decisions. So if you have a methodology around line of credit and your guardrails around when you tap into that and when you don't, it's just not an extra pool of money out here. Okay. But otherwise I'd say, well, what's the problem of having 2 to 3 months operating expenses at your disposal so you don't have to be tempted to use that line of credit in a way that might not be smart.
Hey,
Yeah.
Jill, so there's a question around the working capital. Can you just go back to that equation one more real quick?
Yeah, and you know what? I have a sheet. I'm going to give it to you guys. That's all the calculations on it of what that is. And all of what are all these things?
Good.
What do all these things mean?
Very
Right. Okay. So I'll send that to you. And that has the calculation for AR, AP. So I will send that to you guys. I'm just looking at my time. I always build too much into these, so I apologize. Like I just want to share. And you know, as Joseph said, I'm all about, like, if I can make another entrepreneur's life easier, God help. Like that's what I'm here for. So here's some questions that you want to ask around working capital. Like, with your receivable days, why is it changed? How can we reduce our receivables more? And a lot of people go to automatic transactions, or they set up accountabilities with people to look at it. How do our AR days compare to the terms? Again, if we're collecting at 45 days when our terms are 30 days, what are we doing there from a process perspective? Inventory, WIP days, you know, again, just kind of simple questions when you know it, but I have a list, and I would say just use the list, and maybe that'll give you a shortcut into figuring out what questions you should be asking. All right. So with this section, can you guys type one thing that you've heard where you might need to focus?
Around the 7 levers is
7 levers. So again, and I should have put them up here. Sorry. Pricing, volume, reduction in overhead, reduction in COGS, AR, AP, average days, and WIP. Where might be a lever that you'd want to focus on? Yeah. Yeah. AP. Yeah. And it's usually not a one lever. It's usually multi-dimensional. Okay.
We've had one volunteer for the cash flow analysis already, so.
Hey, I love running them and talking to people about their business. Oh, I love it. Bring it on.
AP, yep.
AP. All right.
Yeah, AP is definitely, that whole AP AR, entrepreneurs have a tendency to be really, they want to pay their bills on time.
Yeah.
But then you end up, you know, money out the door. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All
Yeah,
right.
so you can contact us for the cash flow story. You can just go to CEO Think Tank's website and fill out the contact form and say cash flow story, or you can just reach us directly. I'll put my email in the chat so you guys have it.
Awesome. All right, and then the other tool that we're going to send out is this function accountability chart. And so here's basically what it is. You list all the functions. It's kind of like the pieces of your company. So sales, if you have a controller, marketing, you know, ops, all of that. What's the one person who's accountable? What are the KPIs that they're accountable for? And then this little column at the end, like this results, is who's responsible for those line items on your P&L and your balance sheet? Who's responsible for AR? Who's responsible for AP? Who's responsible for working capital days, right? That process. And you can look at your P&L and your balance sheet and then say, all right, I need to tag somebody, and then I need to teach them what it's all about. And then, you know, at least you're covered, right? Instead of thinking, do I have to do this all myself? There might be other people in your organization. This is a good exercise to do once a quarter, just in general, especially as the world changes, pandemics happen, they come and they go. Do you have organizational shifts in your company? Like, just a very basic exercise is to do this exercise.
And again, this is in the growth tools. You guys should have gotten a link for that. It's a Dropbox. You can download it. There's a lot of stuff on there, but the first couple of pages have everything sort of outlined so you can find stuff. And this is in the people section. And the 7 levers that we've been talking about are in the cash section.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, I got one more thing on the 7 levers, and it's just a little bit about funding, going back to the balance sheet. So all of this is the question around how are you funded? Are you funded with cash? Are you funded with debt? Are you funded by equity that remains in your business? I mean, at the end of the day, do you know your funding mix? That's my question. Like, what proportion of your operations are funded externally by debt and internally by equity? And then you want to look at those trends too, because that affects your cash flow. Because if you've got to pay your current bank loans or your non-current, all that factors in. So if we were to run an analysis for you, we could tell you how that kind of factors in if you have some debt that you use to kind of fund your business. So here are the 4 takeaways I want you to take away. Look at your P&L and your balance sheet on a consistent basis, at least monthly, I would say. A lot of people look at their balance sheet at the end of the year. I would just say, know your AR, know your AP, know your WIP. Seek to identify the trends that are happening over time versus having a good month and a bad month and you're on this roller coaster. You want to be kind of the voice of sanity and say, you know, we need to be making changes in what we're doing to trend in the right direction, right?
And one add there, Jill, that I would do that trends are much easier to see if you actually graph them out versus, yeah. Like I'm an engineer. I know math. I don't know finance. And like one of my biggest helpful things was when Greg Crabtree, who I meet with quarterly, looked, I said, Greg, we got to put this in a friggin' graph because this number shit is not working for me. And then when it was in a graph, I could see the lines going up or going down.
Right.
Use the graphing function.
And then strive to understand the story of the numbers with the right questions, and then identify your power of one, right? And where you might have the greatest impact and what levers to pull. And the trick is not every cash lever is going to produce equal results for your organization. This is a very macro view, but it gives you some strategic insight into where you might want to focus and find those levers at work, because and know what lever you're pushing and why and how that matches up to the story, right, with your business. And because one business here might have different levers than another one. And so that you got to figure out what's going to work for your business and not just copy what somebody else is doing for you. So, okay, with that said, I'm going to hand it back to Cheryl to talk about pricing, because pricing is one of the levers, and this will be really quick. This is just to whet your appetite with pricing and to give you some resources around that. So Cheryl Beth, can I hand it back over to you?
Yeah, so so pricing is like a huge elephant, right? So we're gonna just talk about pricing at a high level, and then we're gonna give you a couple of resources that you can go dig in.
Right.
And just so you know what's coming, for us, execution is about the when, not the what, well, who is important, but it's really about the when. So we are going to be asking you in about 5 or 6 minutes what you are going to commit to do, but I want you to put a when on it, and you're going to have to carve out time, folks. All right, over the next 30 days. It's February 25th. Like, what are you going to do over the next 2 or 3 weeks in order to actually do something coming out of this so that it sort of sinks in? So, the elephant in the room around pricing is always about, do I want to maximize volume, right? Or I want to maximize profit. And again, this is that whole idea that as entrepreneurs, we get a little bit stuck on the top line, right? The revenue is vanity part, as opposed to the profit. The profit is sanity. So here's some of the questions that we really want you to start thinking about. Is, do you want to just increase sales and maximize volume? If you're going to do that, and if you're going to try and commoditize in some way, you've really got to start thinking about things a little bit more strategically, because for many scale ups, more sales is not necessarily equivalent to profitable sales. So can you go to the next one, Jill?
Yeah.
So as Jill mentioned, right, focusing on price is a more powerful lever when it comes to the 7 levers of cash flow. Here, again, we talked about Crabtree a lot. Simons is actually Simon. So Herman Simon and Victoria Medvac are actually the two pricing gurus, and Simons has been around forever. So let's listen for just a couple minutes to Vern talking about Simons and his approach to pricing.
10x the price. So there's the book. Mentor of mine, Herman Simon, he runs the largest pricing consultancy in the world called Simon Kucher. If any of you guys used him, he's got a big LA office. They do about $300 million a year in pricing consultancy. I've recommended him to several clients. And I want you to get his book, Confessions of the Pricing Man, How Price Affects Everything. And one of the reasons we're going to come back and say, and discuss why brand is so critical is, what does brand give you? Pricing power. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be high or low price. He wrote a supplement to this in Harvard Business Review 2 years after the book came out. And you can find it. Just Google low price strategy, Harvard Business Review. If you want to crush it as the low price competitor, there's 7 things you have to do. If you only do 6, you're going to be commoditized. IKEA, the low end of furniture retail, has 13% profitability versus 1% for the rest of the industry.
Hey, Jill,
They're low price. So it's not about high or low price. It's about your strategy around pricing. HBR just had a recent article based on this book about good, better, best. Large corporations are going back to a good, better, best pricing strategy, not just one price when they put in any RFP or proposal, even to existing clients. And the results of the increase in revenue they're able to generate from their own existing client base is significant. So I don't have time to get into all this. The question is, are we spending enough time thinking about and learning about pricing strategy?
It's a short clip, but it'll be in the PowerPoint if you weren't able to hear it. I'm not sure if that was one person.
Yeah, it was just one person, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So as Vern was saying, right, you can definitely go low price, but you want to make sure that you take care of the levers and the 2 resources that he was talking about, right? The one, the Harvard Business Review article that again, these are like sort of business basics, folks, right? The fine line between when low prices work and when they don't. And so if you're going to go that route, make sure that you're looking at those 7 key items and not missing one. And then the other article, which is the good, better, best approach to pricing, with a lot of folks are familiar with, right? That's sort of become like the thing, which goes off the behavioral economics information that we now have about how people buy, right? And so if you actually bracket your prices and with the one that you want people to buy in the middle, that ends up becoming a very effective pricing strategy. It's actually something that we actually just did with CEO Think Tank last year, based on the market. So all of this stuff has to be based on what your market is telling you to do. So, people were really struggling. The sort of average price for scaling up coaching was $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month. And people just couldn't afford that last year. People were being very conservative with their cash. On the other hand, we've got executive roundtable groups that we run that are less expensive, but unfortunately, like we only have so much bandwidth. So we ended up developing, we worked on it, Jill and myself and Eileen, our sort of core group, we worked on it and we came up with the idea of a Scaling Up Foundations, which was directly designed to help people who were short on capital, but knew that they needed to put these things in place. And so literally this just rolled out. And then of course the full price transparency. So again, something for you to think about as you're thinking about your pricing. But there are some companies that use price and volume, right? You can play with both of these variables. It doesn't have to be an either or scenario. So here's just 4 basic strategies to think about. And again, we're just going to pose them as questions and give you a couple quick examples, and then come back around at the very end to say, what's your pricing strategy? And maybe this is your takeaway. You know what? Cheryl, Beth, and Jill, this is really what we need to focus on. We need to carve out a couple of hours with our team to really think about pricing coming out of this. And then you could dig into the HBR articles and Vern's presentation. So the first is price positioning, right? And Vern talked about this, like, all right, so here's a really quick question, folks. Apple. What do we know about Apple and how they've priced, right? I am like, you guys who have Apple Apple phones, like, you're crazy. But people are really loyal, right? People buy Apple because it's Apple. You know, and there's other examples of that, right? In the marketplace. But you can do it. You can position yourself as we're the leader and what we're offering is of value. It's worth it, right? Next piece. Multi-pricing, right? When we charge one price, we're giving up potential profit. Well, so let's do some multi-pricing. Next slide, Jill. You know, you see this all the time, right? If you buy a Diet Coke in the food store, it's what, 50 cents? Or a bottle of water, it's 50 cents, right? You end up going to an airport and you're going to pay $2.50 or $3, right? So there's this whole idea of like where you're actually selling it, and we can maximize profit that way. Can you flip to the next one? You know, obviously airlines are a really big example of this. Can you flip again? I'm just sort of making us get through this. Like if I have 2,000 customers, Robert Crandall used to say, and 400 different prices, I'm obviously short 1,600 prices, right? Airlines do this all the time. So thinking strategically about how are we pricing differently in different places? And then next, again, this idea of a range of price, which we just talked about. And you anchor your preferred pricing, and then you have a high. And again, you're going to end up probably with all three. And then you're going to have to account for that from a capacity standpoint, like I talked about earlier, but at least thinking strategically. And then finally going out to the market and asking, like we're constantly, that's always my question with folks is what's the market charging? What are your competitors charging? How much are you paying for that? And actively asking your customers, hey, you know, would you mind sharing, like, how much are you paying for that? Or your suppliers, how much are you paying for that? Next. You know, based on users, there was a software company that was on this, that's on this call, right? So based on the number of users, you can do multi-dimensional pricing. Jill, can you keep going? You can bundle stuff, right? Happy Meals. You can say, you know, for this and this and this. Marketing companies do this a lot, right? They bundle pricing. And then the last one is add-ons, right? So here's the base, and then we can add on. And again, most of the time when you're doing some type of add-on, you're trying to get people to go right in the middle with add-ons. But you know, some people will add on more. You can start there, and then you can start adding on. So these are the four different, and then finally, yes, thank you, the auctions, right? Auctions, bids, pay per use, name your price. So all these are different pricing techniques that you might want to consider. And again, I'd highly recommend Herman Simon's work, because if this is sort of something that you're going to try and use over the long term, digging into like the different ways that you can price can be a highly profitable way of going. Jill, anything else on the pricing?
No, I think it's good. And I know I think from a entrepreneur perspective, when we talk about pricing, I think there's a lot to be learned there. And because sometimes some entrepreneurs can be gun shy about raising prices because of the response, the perceived response from customers. But I would say, what's your value proposition? To go back to the video that Vern just did, because you know, you can compete on your value proposition. So reading those HBR articles, reading the book by Simon, like, I think those are good places to start if you want to start thinking about your pricing strategies. I think those are, you know, just dive in. Don't be afraid of it. At the end of the day, it is one of your levers that you can pull. All right, so I'm going to ask you kind of your key takeaway from today. So just to recap very quickly, because it's 12:25 and I know we jammed a lot in there. So today we talked about the 4 decisions you need to make to grow your business profitably. We focused on cash today. The 7 levers are these, and the power of 1. So that 1% up or down and the effect that it can have on your cash flow. And then with pricing strategies, some of those kind of pricing strategies very quickly we went through, and some resources that you can have. So what's your key takeaway today? Like what, and to Cheryl Beth's point, what's one thing you want to commit to doing?
Yeah, your
And-
actionable takeaway, not just this was a great idea, but what's one thing
Yeah,
you're willing to commit to? And then you can go talk to your forum group about it.
this was a whole EOA cash day in an hour and a half. Sorry. I'm telling you, I tend to flood. Everyone's time's valuable. So hopefully that's okay.
We're happy to come back, Joseph, if you want.
Pricing. Thank you. Thanks for the kudos.
And then we're not going to ask you to put this in the chat, but make a note to yourself or on your computer or whatever. What day, look at your March schedule, right? March is next week. Look at your March schedule. When are you going to do this? Are you going to carve out time on a Friday afternoon? Are you going to sit down at your team meeting? Like, when are you going to do this?
Cross-selling. Yep. Awesome. Anybody else want to put what they're going to commit to? Look into any of the 7 levers? Any of the pricing?
Joseph, do you have an accountability mechanism that you can send this out to everyone?
No, I'm not the best at accountability.
All right, cool.
All right. Well, we can open up to questions, just some referral things. I mean, our URL address is CEO Think Tank. So if you want to send us any messages or anything, you can reach us there. And then if you want to check out the pricing, just even, I'm a big believer, if you see something better, best thing, we wanted to add this in here, for that. So if people want a format that they want to start thinking about pricing a little bit differently, feel free to go there for it. And then first 5 customers, or, if you want us to run Cash Flow Story, we'll do it. Just reach out to us here.
And I've got 3 folks already, so I've got a couple spots left on that.
I'm so excited. All right, and then Q&A in our last, 4 minutes. Sorry, guys. Crunch the Q&A sector of this. Okay, somebody else. Look at the P&L and balance sheet. Just 1%. Most people can absorb 1%. We had somebody, a CEO who actually like rounded up their invoices. They were like $19.50 or whatever. They just rounded it up, and wow, that was the 1% that then they were a manufacturing company. So it didn't seem her clients didn't care, but it had a dramatic effect on her cash flow. So the 1% thing is a really easy concept. Is the cash flow story analysis simply a spreadsheet and add 1%? No, unfortunately, no. Although we did have one client who back engineered it and created a whole spreadsheet to do all the calculations because he wanted to run it on its own. It's actually, it's a software tool. It's actually called Cash Flow Story. You could go there and check out the software. But it's actually an online kind of platform because it does more than this too, than just do the power of 1. You could look at scenarios for running your business valuation and understand how the power of 1 can impact or increase your business valuation. Right. It does some scenario projections. So it's actually a software kind of tool.
Yeah, and you can go directly there and purchase it. It's one of the things that we just offer that we do for our clients because again, we're strong believers in having strong cash flow.
Right.
Any additional questions that we can answer since we've got 2 minutes left? Joseph, I don't know if you cut people off right at or.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, just rapid fire, come off mute and ask away.
Mm-hmm. And join us on join us on March 23rd. And, you know, when we get into strategy and business model canvas, we're happy to help there too.
And that one, we're actually going to have you create your own business model, like
Yeah.
document it during the meeting. It's another rapid fire, a lot of information, but you get to do it for your business as we're moving along. So
Anything else? Any others? Nope.
No,
Well, thank-
this was highly impactful.
Yeah, thank you for having
Yes.
us. It was really, it was
yes,
really
thank
fun.
you.
Thanks, and thanks for rolling with us and the information
Oh,
that
you guys are stars. Thank you so much for being here.
The fact that you broke this down like this in 90 minutes is impressive. Very
Took
impressive.
a little work, but thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Cash
Thank you
Cash
all.
is near
for
and dear
being
to our
here.
hearts.
Big shout out to Martin Solarzano, who helped make this all happen. Cheryl Beth, Jill, you both are stars. Thank you. And like I said at the beginning of the event, these two are just here to help make entrepreneurs' lives easier. They're
Yep.
here to help. Their YouTube channel is phenomenal. Their email news blast is exceptional, so resourceful. I have been so happy to be a part of their community, and I'm so happy to bring them into our world of EO. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And we will see you on the 23rd.
All right.
Sounds
See you
good.
next month.